Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of Castle Church in Wittenberg, Germany on October 31st, 1517. His goal was to engage in debate and bring the teachings of the Church into conformance with the Word of God. The call to reform the Church launched a revolution, and the sides had to choose between papal decrees or the Word of God. Today, churches are turning to mystical channeling through books like Jesus Calling, and following Franciscan friar Richard Rohr and the occultism of the Enneagram to gain spiritual knowledge not found in Scripture. Celebrity pastors are calling to unhitch from the Old Testament.
Peter, James, Paul elected to unhitch the Christian faith from their Jewish scriptures. And my friends, we must as well. And I'll tell you why. It's actually the same reason they did. Because we must not make it difficult for those Gentiles who are turning to God. They didn't. We shouldn't either.
Welcome to the Fellowship of the Book as Dr. Donald Williams guides us as we embark on his 95 Theses for a New Reformation, a roadmap for Post-Evangelical Christianity.
So I was wondering as I was watching that, since Dr. Williams is going to be our guide, should he be wearing a pith helmet?
Hey.
Well, Dr. Williams, thank you for joining us and leading us again in all things that are going to cause issues in the church, because the church is largely disobedient these days.
In many ways it is. I wear a lot of hats. A pith helmet has never been one of them. But
well, you should, because you should, because sometimes you do pithy statements, so that kind of works.
Yes, because I could wear a deer stalker and present myself as Sherlock Holmes. And engaging in the search for evidence and conclusions. But our topic tonight, since we might as well act like we have one, is the relationship between Christianity and culture, which is a question that you cannot avoid, except an awful lot of us somehow manage to do so. The Christian faith was born out of an ancient Semitic culture into an ancient pagan culture, and has survived into a modern secular culture, penetrating every single possible kind of culture that there is on the planet. And every time it does so, there is an unavoidable influence that goes both ways. Christianity transforms the culture, but the culture will inevitably influence the forms in which Christianity appears, the forms that the church takes in that culture. And every culture, because cultures are the creations of human beings who were created in the image of God, but who have rebelled against God and fallen into sin. Every culture is a complicated mix of good and evil. And so every church and every culture has to use discernment to find out, okay, what is biblical that we're doing and what is culture, and be able to tell the difference. In the 19th century, Western missionaries would just kind of unthinkingly get the natives who they had won to Christ to wear Western clothes, teach them to sing Western hymns. That wasn't necessarily the best thing to do, but you got to do something, and so in our own churches, what is it about our churches that reflects the New Testament, and what is it that reflects not the New Testament at all, but American culture? And we don't even realize it because we've become nose blind to the malodorous exhalations, not to mention the bad smells of American culture. I mean, you look at a lot of our churches, And there's an awful lot of Madison Avenue. There's an awful lot of pragmatism. There's an awful lot of bureaucracy in the structure, all kinds of stuff that, the churches I was raised in, they believed it was absolutely a biblical mandate that they have an altar call at the end of every service.
Right.
Okay. Because it's a biblical mandate that we try to fulfill the Great Commission. But wait a minute. The altar call was never invented until the 19th century.
Huh.
It was invented by Charles Grandison Finney in the 19th century. Yep. How in the world did the church exist and win converts and make disciples for almost 2,000 years before altar calls were ever heard of? But we were oblivious to the fact. Now, I'm not against altar calls, and I'm not arguing that you shouldn't have them. They are a technique. They are a tool that have some advantages, some disadvantages. They might be useful in certain settings or for certain purposes, but the problem was not that we had them. The problem was we weren't aware of the fact that we were making something essential that the New Testament not only doesn't command, but had never even heard of. So, I mean, you get these churches that are indistinguishable from shopping malls, like the religious shopping mall. Does that reflect New Testament Christianity, or does that reflect American culture? Well, you can't not reflect the culture that you're in. So you have to use discernment and deciding, okay, when is this biblical? When is it cultural? And then the cultural, when is it a legitimate expression into this particular culture of the gospel? And when is it the other way around, the culture corrupting the gospel? And the problem is we can't exercise this discernment because most of us aren't even aware that we're doing it.
Right.
Because, like I said, you get nose blind to things that are part of your culture. You don't realize that they are from your culture. You just assume it's from the Bible when it's not actually there. So we're going to take a look at this whole issue of Christianity and culture tonight. And we'll start by getting the slides on the screen. As usual, we're going to break this down into 5 theses. And before we get to the first one, we need to think, as we've been doing, a little bit about the nature of the problem itself. So here we go. Good grief. Why doesn't this look like it does?
Like it's supposed to?
When I make the slide.
Well, I don't know that. I don't know the answer to that question.
Sometimes it's compatibility or incompatibility. Sometimes.
What in contemporary Christendom represents universal truths and what reflects the culture into which these truths had to be carnated? And when is that inevitable cultural flavoring a sign that the church has successfully indigenized itself incarnationally, and when is it a corruption of its basic principles? That's what we are trying to have to discern.
All of that.
And so in order to put ourselves in a position where we have a chance to discern it, we have to understand a biblical perspective on what culture is. Can you give a definition of culture? Anybody want to try?
Culture.
Without cheating by having read the chapter in.
Oh yeah, sure. You expect everything, don't you?
Well, this isn't the definition of culture, but culture is something that is kind of unique to human beings. That's the first thing to think about. Robins build nests, right?
Mm-hmm.
They all build the exact same nest. It's the same design. Every robin's nest is the exact same design, differing only in what kind of straw was available for them to work with.
Mm.
Okay. But human beings live in houses, they live in caves, they live in tents, they live in duplexes, they live in apartments. And the houses, they're not all the same design. You've got ranch, you've got neo-colonial, you've got split levels, you've got Cape Cod, you've got Tudor half timbered, every conceivable kind of style. And so human beings do that, and you can take not just their houses, but everything we do. We do it in a way that is completely different from the way animals function because we're different from them. And the way we're different is that we are creative because we were made in the image of the Creator. Mm-hmm. We're the only animal that was made in the image of God. So God makes all the other animals, then he makes Adam. And the first thing that happens is that we're told Adam and Eve are made in the image of God. In the image of God created he them. Well, what does that mean? Well, okay, we just started reading the Bible. We're in Genesis chapter 1. So what do we know about God? Basically two things. He is incredibly powerful and he's creative. And he shows his creativity through language because God speaks the world into existence, and then he uses language to give it form and organization. God says, "Let there be light," and there's light. And the angels are like, "Cool, man. Look at all those photons running around. We didn't have those before." And God says that the light is good, and he separates the light from the darkness and creates day and night. And so he's using language to give things existence, to give them form, light and darkness, day and night, and to give them meaning and value. He says the light is good. Yeah. Let there be light, and there's light. And God says, "Hey, this is good stuff. I like this stuff. I'm going to make some more of this. This is good." And the whole creation then proceeds on that same basis. So God is the creator. We know that he's the creator. We know that he uses language, speech, as how he does the creating. So then he creates the universe. He creates the earth. He creates the Garden of Eden. He creates the animals and the plants. And the last thing he creates is Adam and Eve. And then we're told they're made in his image. So how are they like him? They're like him in that they are creators, little c. Now he's the capital C. And they show this just like he did with language. Okay. What's the very first thing Adam does? He names the animals. He creates words. He makes up a language from scratch. This is hard to do. In my course on the history of the English language, I've got a lecture on where do words come from.
Oh,
and there are words that we borrow from other languages. There are words that we create out of roots that we have, and we rearrange those and make new words. There's lots of different ways that we create words. And one of them is root creation. Root creation is a word that would be created completely from scratch, not using any previously existing linguistic material. And it's less than a tenth of 1% of all words, almost impossible to do. Adam was doing it every time he opened his mouth. I mean, creating a language, and language is how human beings express that creativity. Animal communication, some animals communicate in some fairly sophisticated ways, but their language isn't really a language because it lacks creativity. That is, it's instinctual. There was this one particular group of monkeys that was studied, discovered to have 60 words, that is 60 sounds that they made that had meaning to the life of monkey, like food, danger, I'll pick your ticks off if you pick mine. Other things meaningful to the life of monkey.
The important stuff, yeah.
But here, but it wouldn't have mattered if they had 600 of them or 6,000, because here's what they didn't do. No monkey ever made up a new sound to communicate a new idea that had never before entered into the mind of monkey. No monkey took the 60 sounds they had and recombined them in a new combination, or certainly not a new pattern, to express a new idea that had never before entered into the mind of monkey. Human beings do that all the time. I have probably uttered several sentences already tonight that involved creating new combinations of words that you'd never heard before.
True.
That particular combination, and yet you understood it effortlessly. At least I'm assuming you did, and don't anybody prove me wrong. But you do the same thing. You without even thinking about it, try to express a thought, and it comes out, and it may be a combination of words and grammatical structures that you're using for the very first time and have never heard before. You made it up. We do this. This is showing us that we're created in the image of God, at creativity. Okay. God puts man in the garden to dress it and keep it. We're supposed to take care of it for God. We're his servants to run the place. And so he gives us language so that we can think and we can reason, and we can, this is the source of our rationality. It's the source of our moral nature, because unlike other animals, we have to render an account of our stewardship of the garden. Okay? So human beings are creative because they're made in the image of the Creator. And this is the absolute rock bottom place where culture comes from. Let's see if we can get the slides back on the screen. Human beings are created because they're made in the image of the Creator. Okay. G.K. Chesterton said, art is the signature of man. In his great book, The Everlasting Man. He noticed, for example, that, primitive men drew pictures of reindeer on the walls of their caves. You don't find any place where reindeer drew pictures of men. And people,
that's because they hide them, I think.
They hide them very well. And secular people who want to think of man as simply another animal will focus on the parallels. We make houses, robins make nests. Yeah, but if a robin started making nests the way we do, if there was 100 different styles of nest just to express the personalities of different birds, if they started making little statues of famous robins out of sticks and clay and sticking them up next to their nest or inside of it, we would suddenly think this is very strange. In
phenomenal.
Fact, miraculous.
Right.
But that's what we do. Art is the signature of man, and that creativity is the source from which culture comes. Okay. J.R.R. Tolkien in his essay on fairy stories, which you can find in the Tolkien Reader, the book that's on the screen to the left, explained this in what he called his doctrine of subcreation. Primary creation is the creation that God does, but because God created us in his image so that we're also creative, then we create too. We have subcreation or secondary creation. And we make still by the law in which we're made, was his explanation of this. This is where culture comes from, and this is why culture exists. So there are two conclusions we can draw from this. Given that culture is the result of human creativity, it's the expression of who we are as creatures made in the image of God. First is that culture is significant. It matters because it flows from the very heart of who we are as human beings. It is our nature to create culture. And the second conclusion that follows from that is that cultural determinism is absolutely eliminated from our thinking. Postmodernists basically are cultural determinists. They say, you believe what you believe and think what you think because of your race, your gender, and your culture. And that's what causes you to think that way. But if culture is something we created, then we can't think of it in terms of cultural determinism because we stand above culture. It's something that we create and are creating, and it creates us too. There's a kind of a feedback loop that enters there, but we never lose the ability to make a difference in it and change it. That leads us to the point where we're ready to give our definition of culture. Culture is the material, social, and symbolic matrix that results from the full range of mankind's creative activity. Okay? So we're in the world like the other animals, and the other animals have to look for food, and they have to make shelter, and they do it in the same way that they've always done it, and they do it instinctively. And human beings do it in 100,000 different kinds of ways. And we're constantly changing the world in a way the animals don't. Interestingly, the word culture comes from two Latin roots, or one Latin root, two Latin words. A cultor in Latin is a planter, and cultura is tilling, cultivation. And so agriculture contains the word culture. Agri is from agros, which is field, plus culture. Agriculture literally is the earliest form of where it became obvious that human beings are different from the other animals. Because we do things, we exercise our creativity, and we make the world different. And so we have stalks of wheat or olive trees lined up in rows in fields, producing a yield that nature by itself would never be capable of. And so culture is the complete and total result, the complete and total material, social, and symbolic matrix that results from the full range of mankind's creative activity. So growing food, agriculture, we use our creativity to make nature do stuff it wouldn't have done that efficiently without our input. Whether you're creating a home or a business or a farm or a work of art or a government or a club or a birdhouse, whatever it is you're doing, it's whether you're creating a story or a symbol or a philosophy, this is all flowing from who we are as human beings in culture. Okay.
Hey, Dan, I got a question for you.
Uh-huh.
So, like, I'm looking at sometimes how, the dictionary defines a word, and then the Bible can define a word differently. Well, you've defined it kind of interesting where it fits both man's definition and it could easily fit into a biblical definition. But the question is, like, if somebody's living a life without God, right? They're living in a worldly culture. And then when they come to God, if they join the church and get involved with the church, wouldn't you say that the culture they're living just completely shifted?
Well, it should shift
So that's
in
a
a
yes.
lot of profound
It
ways.
should. Yeah, it should.
And it will, but whether it shifts in all the ways that it should to completely and totally reflect the new input of Scripture into that person's culture, yeah, that remains to be seen. And we can do it well, we can do it badly. So let's go back to the slide because, in fact, that's coming up right now.
No.
Right about now.
Yeah, here we go. So, culture is the material, social, and symbolic matrix that results from the full range of mankind's creative activity. Culture is not just art and music and drama. We think of that as culture because it's very obvious that these are things that only human beings do. We don't have the option not to do this. You're going to participate in culture. You're going to be a creator of culture and a consumer of culture. You don't have the option not to do it. The question is, how are you going to do it? Are you going to do it for God or for yourself? Are you going to do it in accordance with his truth or in rebellion against it? Are you going to do it in ways that reflect his truth or that suppress and distort it? Are you going to do it in ways that are submissive to his wisdom or insisting on your own folly? And in fact, all of us are a complicated mix of all of that because none of us do it perfectly in the way that would perfectly reflect God's truth, etc. And some people do it very rebelliously, and others people are bringing their lives and the culture that flows from their life into submission to God's word, his truth, and his wisdom. So,
Can I interrupt?
Jefferson moving from a pagan or a secular culture into the Christian culture of the church is going to be shifting his approach to it in each of these ways. And of course, how well and how thoroughly will he do so? That remains to be seen. Don?
Yeah, I was just going to point back to Genesis, where we see this really in action in a specific way.
Mm-hmm.
God had said, okay, guys, here's the deal. I want you to scatter and multiply. And they said, and they were a culture that he was speaking to. And they decided, no, we don't really want to do that. We are going to suppress what you said. We're going to build a tower to ourselves to the heavens.
Yeah.
And God said, okay, no, you're not going to do that either.
Right.
And we call that the Tower of Babel.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure was a Babel.
Yeah.
So it's a perfect example. Yeah. Thesis number 3. If we create culture because we were made in the image of God, and if culture is the total symbolic, social, and material matrix created by the full range of our creativity, then culture is not and cannot be spiritually neutral or irrelevant. Right. Now, why do I bother saying this? Because it sounds like it's too obvious to say. Because lots of Christians, I don't think it'd be easy to find a Christian who would say that culture is neutral or irrelevant, but my goodness, we act like we think it is. We act like we think it is. I mean, try to get the church to return to its try to get the conservative evangelical church to return to the historic role of the church as a patron of the arts,
Mm.
an influencer of the arts.
Mm.
And people would just look at you like you're speaking Akkadian or something, like that doesn't connect at all. And we come to church and we say that we believe the gospel and we're trying to spread the gospel, and then we go home and we thoughtlessly consume the entertainment that the culture has just put out there for us.
Mm.
And we turn on the TV and we watch these sitcoms where promiscuity is accepted as normal and even good.
Mm-hmm.
And we're amused. We're not weeping, we're laughing at the tragedy of what's being put in front of us. There are the nostalgia channels, unfortunately, fortunately they do exist, because you still have access to the old shows. You can go back and you can watch Leave It to Beaver. And everybody makes fun of that family. I can remember when that was normal.
Yeah.
Right.
I can remember as a kid watching that show, and nothing about it seemed unrealistic at all. That was the world we lived in the 50s.
Right.
And so the thing has shifted in ways that we've just accepted blindly, and we're influenced by it. The kids, my goodness, some of the lyrics in the music that people are listening to today, and that's going through their heads, and nobody thinks there's any conflict here but with this and our commitment to Christ. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of good role models on how to deal with this, because you basically got two options that I can see as I'm looking across the church. You've got people who simply accept the culture as, well, this is just what it is, and let it influence them unthinkingly. Or you've got the old fundamentalist rejection of culture. This is all worldly. We don't mess with that. We don't drink, smoke, cuss, or chew, and we don't go with girls that do.
Exactly. Yeah.
We don't play cards or go to movies. We don't do anything that's groovy. Well, of course, so they tried to build this little Christian ghetto where all of the world was kept on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that didn't work either. They were just letting the culture go to hell.
Yeah.
Not surprising that it's done so. And they weren't as isolated as they thought they were. But I mean, we're supposed to be participating in it as salt and light, not just escaping it. And so,
now, something you've mentioned a couple of times, which I think we can't emphasize enough right now, is that we either shape culture or are shaped by culture, and we don't realize oftentimes how that happens.
Well,
so for 1700 years, Judeo-Christian morality and ethics sort of reigned. Even though everyone wasn't a Christian, they still held to that.
Right.
Well, that's changed a lot in the last 15 years, especially. This book I would really recommend for everyone to read. Let me change this a second.
Go to the other.
Yeah,
the other way. There you go.
The Wolf in Your Pocket.
The
Wolf in Your Pocket. Now, why this is important, and I think he did an outstanding job demonstrating it, is any of us who were born, let's say in the 1950s-ish, early 60s even, we grew up in an area where we basically had the same worldview as our mothers and our fathers, and the butcher and the banker. And that would be true if you're in Iowa. You would have a different kind of a worldview if you lived in South America, say Mexico, because you're now being influenced by those people, your mother, your father, the butcher, the baker, and they have different information that they're using. Now, suddenly what we're having is, and we're watching this happen in real time, where if you're 40 years old or under, you fundamentally have the same worldview as everyone else in every continent on the planet, because you're sharing your ideas on social media. You are being shaped by what's going on in all of the other countries, primarily through socialism kinds of ideas.
Right.
And so that's why when you had like Black Lives Matter, that erupted across the planet because we're all connected by social media.
Yeah. And
so,
and the church has given basically no guidance in how a Christian should use this new technology.
Right.
Should we have cell phones, or do we cut ourselves off from all of that? Obviously, we're using that technology right now,
right,
to create this show.
Right.
And so, yeah, we don't think we should just pretend it doesn't exist, or that we should not touch it, but we've given our young people no guidance on how a Christian should approach these things, and it's destroying lots of people.
That's where it starts with the young people, I think. And
Yeah.
I was going to ask Dr. Williams, what about this idea came to me as you were talking about the church separating itself. Would you say that kind of created a subculture of its own when the church kind of retracted in itself?
Well, yeah.
Would you consider that?
Can't, there are, within American culture, there are multiple subcultures.
Right.
One of which is the Christian subculture, which has its own subcultures.
Exactly.
That are
right.
infinite.
And denominations are, you can also put them in there.
I agree with what Don Veinot was saying, except for one word. He said you either create culture, or you either create culture, or you're created, or it
influencing culture, or being influenced by culture.
Yeah. And the truth is, you're doing both all the time.
Right.
Because every time you go to the store and buy something, that is a vote that more of that product should be made.
Right. Good point.
So you're influencing culture, even though you're not thinking about it. What I'm trying to do is get us to think about it. And it's influencing you. Again, you need to have a filter, a biblical filter that is selective in what you allow from the culture to be influencing you.
Right.
You can't shut it out. And if you just take the path of least resistance, then you will end up being corrupted by the surrounding culture in many ways.
Right.
So let's get back to the screens, because we're going to think about the fact that we're always influencing and being influenced by culture, and it's never neutral or something that we can safely ignore. Scripture gives us some basic motifs or patterns about how we should be approaching this. We should think of ourselves as strangers and exiles. Not, my primary citizenship is not United States. It's not this planet. It's not the United Federation of Planets. It's in heaven. Okay. I'm a citizen of the kingdom of heaven who happens to live as a stranger and an exile. I'm a resident alien, I've got a green card. I should think of myself that way. because my primary identification is with God and with heaven, and therefore the Bible is my constitution, and that should be forming the way I live and the way I do culture myself. Now, we are strangers and exiles. We're not to think of ourselves as primarily identified with the culture we live in, but we're supposed to seek the welfare of the city we find ourselves in. Jeremiah 29:7, very, very important verse, because this is from the period of the Old Testament when Israel was gone, but Judah had been sent into exile in Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeremiah, who's a prophet that bridges the gap, he's prophesying when the exile takes place, and he tells them, get jobs, build houses, have families, and seek the welfare of that city until God brings you back to Palestine. And so American culture is not my primary identity, but I'm supposed to be living in it in such a way that I'm a good citizen of it insofar as that is compatible with my obedience to God and seeking the welfare of the city that we live in. And we think of ourselves as in it, but not of it.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're going to successfully navigate these issues, we've got, I think, to spend a lot more time and effort building these structures into the minds of ourselves and our disciples. Most people don't stop to consciously think about, okay, this is the filter I should be using as the culture comes in trying to influence me, and I'm at the same time influencing it by seeking its welfare. And so I should be paying my taxes. I should be voting for good candidates. I should be participating in civic life to make my city a better place to live. And because of my biblical knowledge, then I'm in a better position to do that than my fellow citizens. And they should see that. Now, there's going to be conflict between me and them, but it's not just that I'm constantly condemning them for what they're doing wrong, but I'm trying to create a culture in my own home, in my own congregation, that acts as salt and light in the society. Okay. Finally, brethren, Philippians 4:8 is a key verse also in how we approach this. Whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, whatever is excellent, whatever is praiseworthy, dwell on these things. All right? This is part of our mandate for how we are supposed to be ambassadors of Christ in this foreign culture. And the interesting thing to me about that is it's a positive command. How do we practically be in but not of American culture in the 21st century? It's a positive commandment. Almost every sermon I've ever heard on this, subtly, without the preacher even realizing he was doing it, flipped it and turned it into a negative commandment about all the stuff we're not supposed to be,
involved in.
All this stuff is worldly and we shouldn't be touching it.
Right.
Well, there are things that are so evil that you should not be consuming them.
Right.
You shouldn't let your mind dwell on them, but that doesn't mean you're ignorant of them. Okay. So I don't feed my mind on those sitcoms, but I've watched a few episodes of them so that I know what's going on. I know what the culture around me is and how people are thinking, so that I can, but I don't feed my mind on that. I feed my mind on all that stuff in Philippians 4:8. Nietzsche, contrary to the bumper sticker, is not peachy.
Yeah.
In fact, he is very preachy, and what he's preaching is straight from the pit.
Right.
But I wasn't breaking Paul's commandment when I read his philosophy. You got to have good scouting reports on what the enemy's up to.
Right.
And ignorance is not the path to safety. But I don't feed my mind on that. You keep the, you keep the pure water of Scripture flowing through your mind constantly, and you keep the waters of the best of classical and Christian culture. You keep that constantly flowing through your mind, because you can't keep the other stuff out. But if you keep the positive flowing through your mind, the positive starting with Scripture, then your mind will respond properly to the rest. So it's a matter of, and there are things that none of us should be consuming. You don't have to spend any time consuming hardcore pornography to know that it's evil. But there are things that maybe some individuals need to know about. There was a movie done on the Beowulf story a few years ago. Starred Angelina Jolie as as Grendel's mother. And it was awful from every standpoint, including the moral standpoint. And I saw it once because, as a person who was responsible for teaching Beowulf, I needed to know the assumptions my kids were going to be bringing in as we looked at that text. I needed to know about it, but I don't feed my mind on that. I feed my mind on Scripture. I read the entire Bible through once a year. I read the whole Old Testament annually. I'm getting through the New Testament about twice a year, and the Psalms about twice a year. That's what I feed my mind on. I've read The Lord of the Rings every year since 1968. So it's not that I'm ignorant of what the world is saying. We need to hear those voices so we can respond to them biblically. But the positive emphasis is feed your mind on that which is good. Okay.
I have another question real quick. Can you remember back, Dr. Williams, years ago when you used to feed your mind a little bit more on that stuff? What was the consequence? Like the people that are doing that, what's the consequence of that in your experience?
Well, it has consequences. I remember, for example, when I was still in school, and I would have summer jobs, right, to get back in school the next fall. And those summer jobs would tend to be things like common labor on a construction crew. And I'd be surrounded by vulgar people,
Right,
whose language was not the kind of thing that I'm going to say out loud on this.
Not Sunday school language for sure, right?
No. So okay, so I don't approve of it. I don't use it, but by the end of the summer, it would take me a couple of months after that was over before I could relax, because that stuff would
stuff in you,
would be in my head, and it would want to come out. So it was a struggle, even though I was actively trying to use the filter and be against it. And if you're just floating through life and not thinking about it, there's no way that you're going to escape all kinds of damage spiritually from those influences. And so that's not, of course, what we're looking at. Let's get back to the screen because we got a couple of more points to try to cover.
Screen.
So we don't want to be pointless, is what you're saying, right?
Yes.
There we go. It's a positive commandment. Feed your mind on the good stuff. All right. Thesis number 4. If culture can't be spiritually neutral or irrelevant, Francis Schaeffer was right to insist that part of Christian discipleship is living out the lordship of Christ over the total culture. The good thing about 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago, that Don Veinot was talking about was that a lot of Christian values and moral values were reflected in the larger culture. The downside of that is that we totally overestimated how much influence the church and the Bible were actually having.
Right.
It was more superficial than we realized. And because we were misinterpreting the Great Commission and making converts instead of disciples, then it was being hollowed out underneath from the foundations in ways that we weren't even aware of. And the cascade started in the 60s with the sexual revolution.
Right.
And it started collapsing a piece at a time. And every single next chunk of it that fell apart, like the biblical idea of marriage, the traditional idea of marriage most recently, and now you end up every piece that falls off of the original consensus, we're shocked, because we totally underestimated the influence of secular culture and overestimated how deep the Christian influence of an American culture was. And we had a superficial understanding of the lordship of Christ and its radical implications for all of life. We thought, and understandably, I think, this is one of the things that our more prophetic teachers ought to have recognized and warned us about before they did. But, in the 50s, you thought that, aside from being a little bit more moral than other people, there really didn't need to be that much difference between the Christian and the rest of the world.
Right.
And of course, that was completely naive. If the gospel and the Bible are truth, not just religious truth, but truth about the world, truth about reality, then being a Christian ought to make a difference in the way we approach the way we build our families, the way we approach politics, the way we approach work and career, the way we approach entertainment, the way we approach high culture, arts and the arts and art and music and that kind of thing. Being a Christian is supposed to mean that I am doing all of those things as a Christian and from the Christian worldview. And this is not just negative about all the stuff we're not going to do. It's about how we are doing it. Think about it this way. Christian thesis number 5. The Christian subculture in any society should bring salt and light to that society through its own cultural activity, both in creating and consuming culture. Okay. So we're not doing this. Contemporary Christian music is a cheap, sanitized version of secular rock and roll.
Yeah.
Okay. And not all that creative. You know, if we were doing this the way we should be doing it, we'd be the ones creating the new trends. And we'd be the ones, putting out the products that just from their sheer quality get people's attention. And, it's not just that we should be complaining about the world's music. We should be presiding something better. And whether it's music or art or cinema or literature or business or sports or politics, that's what we should be doing in all of those areas. Here's the bottom line. If our work manifests reliable quality for a fair price, I mean, Christians should stand out, and their businesses should stand out as people who do that. If our work manifests reliable quality for a fair price, if our homes manifest loving hierarchy without oppression, if our lives manifest creative applications of biblical principles that reveal goodness, truth, and beauty in many ways that can join with the heavens to declare the glory of God. And I could add another half a dozen parallel phrases to that. Pick any aspect of human culture, and this is the pattern. If we were doing that, if people said, I know those guys won't make a cake for a gay wedding, but doggone it, they make the best cakes in town, and they're selling them for a price we can afford. We need to support them. If people were saying that kind of thing about us, then our preaching of the gospel will have a credibility and a power that we've not seen in our generation. In other words, we're telling people, we got a message that's from God who designed the world, and this is the key to human thriving in this life and in the next. Then when they look at us, they ought to see the fruit of it. And unfortunately, we don't, because in our churches, unfortunately, our approach to culture has been mostly unthinking. And you see that in the church's relationship to the arts.
Right.
The first millennium and a half, the church was a major patron of the arts and consequently a major influencer of the arts and a determiner of the content they were going to have. Now, a lot of that was in ways that we wouldn't approve of. A lot of it was icons, etc. But you look at the impact the Reformation had on the art world, it was very positive. The Dutch painters of the 17th century, people like Rembrandt, were people like Francis Schaeffer and Hans Rookmaaker can show you ways in which that was part of the fruit of the Reformation. It was a return of the church to having a positive impact and influence on every aspect of the society it lived in. So how do we get back to something like that? It's not a form of elitism. That doesn't help. It's not that we want more art in our churches that nobody can understand what the picture is about, or more poems written by Christians that nobody can understand what they're saying. We don't try to copy what the world is doing, but we do things that embody truth and goodness and beauty. So you get what you reward, you get what you value. And consequently, we don't get good quality coming from Christians in the arts. We don't get Christians feeling called to go into the arts. Why is the art community and the entertainment community at the forefront of corruption, driving it? Because a Christian young person who felt called to be an artist of any kind would be looked at really, really funny by his church. If you're called to the mission field, the church is going to support you and encourage you and get behind you, and rightly so. If you're called,
I might have a slight.
It's going to end up pushing you outside.
Well, I might say, when you say they're going to support you if you go to mission field, that is really true if the mission field is over the large body of salt water.
Right.
They are less inclined to support you if you are a missionary to, say, cults in the New Age here, or to false churches that are false teachers that are infiltrating the church.
Right.
Yeah, they're not so interested in that.
So you're right. It's even worse than what I said. But it's not, the missionary, that's a spiritual, that's up there.
Right.
If you're called to become a pastor, your church may support you and send you, pay your way through seminary. I know people whose churches got behind them, helped them go to seminary, made sure they got the training they needed. If you're called to do just about anything else, church is going to look at you really funny. Now, our culture wars have caused us to elevate lawyers and politicians as being legitimate ambassadors for Christ in those fields, because we need them. But again, if you're called to make a difference, the point is that Christ is the Lord of the total culture of our lives, and therefore everything we do should reflect the beauty and the glory of who he is. And that should be in our homes, in our clubs, in our politics, in our businesses, in our arts, entertainment, our sports, everything. And so we ought to be in all of these areas thinking about, how do I function as an ambassador of Christ, a representative of God's kingdom in all these areas? And if we can get our thinking moving in that direction, then we're going to find that not only do we have better homes and businesses and churches, but we're able to preach the gospel with a new kind of power and integrity, because we're whole people living out the wholeness of the full counsel of God in a whole life. And that should be what characterizes the relationship between Christianity and culture. Discernment and positive impact.
Here.
Yeah, there's a couple of Christian authors that I read, and unless you knew them, you wouldn't necessarily know they're Christian. But the faith is written all the way through their books. And they don't do something that a friend of mine I call Jesus smuggling. In other words, they don't go with the idea of where they could put Jesus in and then build a story around it. Instead, they're telling a story, and it naturally flows and falls into place with the various characters.
Well, it's false advertising,
Right. Yeah.
People bought a novel and they got a sermon instead.
Right.
there are ways of writing novels that will be thought-provoking in spiritually productive ways. But the standard Christian romance formula where everybody gets saved in the last chapter, a little bit too predictable and doesn't really reflect real life.
Okay, you need your screens back?
No, I think we're good.
You think we're good? No, there's none that are good.
But I think the presentation is at a place where, being 5 minutes over time, we can wrap it up.
Who's counting?
Well, we've got two here that are both budding artists, let's say. One's a musician, one's more art. Daffy Dill says this. And art, as an artist myself, art and the church have always been intertwined. They were more intertwined previously than they are currently.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we need more of that, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And then Lady Campion is working on music. Let me see if I can roll up here. So I think we want to encourage, that's what you're talking about. We want to encourage artists that are believers, because it is a way, you're talking about how we are like God, because we have his communicable attributes, which includes art, being creative, inventive languages and so forth. So that's a good thing. And we've largely lost that over the last 40 years.
Before my retirement, I was a professor of English, the way I made my living. And I had a Christian writers and artists group, students that would meet at my house once a week. And I was discipling them specifically to, what are the spiritual qualities we need to build into ourselves so that we can be witnesses with integrity in this very difficult world in this area, and look at this as a spiritual calling. It's just rare that that churches have. I had access to the kids through the school, but actually that was a ministry of the church I was pastoring. And it was important to me that it be that. Who's there to disciple young Christian musicians and artists in the specific challenges they're going to face from the church and the world, in order for them to do what they need to be doing? So
very difficult.
Okay. Any other questions, comments?
Nope.
Not today, eh?
Not today.
Well,
good talk.
Yeah, it was a good talk. It was mostly good talk. The crowd kept me slightly busy, occupied tonight. So
I know.
That may be a good sign.
Well, yeah, we've had some new people here. Phil S-O-P-H-E-R. I'd like to try to get this. I guess I'm not going to do that. Okay. All right. So that will end it for tonight. We'll be back next week, 8:00 Central Time, and to pick on our guide through the mystery of the issues of the church.
Oh yeah.
And with that, adios.
Next week,
Next week is what's the theme?
5 Theses on Pietism.
Oh, ouch.
So, before anyone even deigns to open it, what is pietism?
Yeah.
There
When
you go.
we feel never
Pietism
mind. Ponder on that.
related to the word piety, which
Yeah.
is a word for Christian spirituality.
Mhm.
And pietism was a movement in the 18th century that has been very influential on evangelical spirituality down to the 21st century. And so we'll take a look at that history and see the ways in which it might help or hinder us developing a really biblical spirituality.
Yep. Okay.
Should be interesting.
And with that,
Yep.
we're going to do the wave goodbye,
Adios.
and I'm going to go end stream.
Peak.